Hyperfocusing with ADHD is a superpower. It's surprising that people like me with ADHD who find it excruciatingly difficult to even sit still for any period of time can achieve flow in work and get things done with an unstoppable focus. But it's not all smooth sailing. In this video, I'll be talking about some of the downsides of hyperfocusing with ADHD. Keep watching to find out more. Hi guys, I'm Wahid, the ADHD medic. Welcome to my channel. So firstly, what is hyperfocusing? Hyperfocusing is a state of profound attention where there's total absorption in a task, to the point where people with ADHD are able to tune out everything and everybody around them. It's also characterized by distorted time perception, or failing to notice the world around and continuing to focus on a task for really prolonged periods of time. Hyperfocus usually occurs when an activity is fun, such as a hobby or a leisurely activity, but it can also commonly occur during work-related tasks. It's difficult to experimentally induce hyperfocus because there aren't a perfect set of conditions that might cause somebody with ADHD to go into hyperfocus. It usually occurs, as with everything with ADHD, spontaneously, and it varies from person to person. It's important to note that some people with ADHD don't ever go into hyperfocus, and it's not formally part of the diagnostic criteria for ADHD. Alongside ADHD, hyperfocus has been studied extensively in the medical literature in people with autism and schizophrenia. So what's my personal experience of hyperfocusing with ADHD? Hyperfocusing occurs almost every single day of my life, and so I feel I have a lot of experience with it and I'm qualified to talk about it. When I'm studying or working, it usually occurs in the evenings before bed. I can ram through lots of work pretty productively. Time disappears around me and I can find myself just losing track of time. And what I usually think is only 15 minutes of work ends up being 2 or even 3 hours of solid work. It was really helpful at medical school to just have this ability to just sit down and complete tasks left in my task list for that day. And so it's been a really important part of my medical school experience. For hobbies and fun, I really find it very difficult to separate hyperfocus from actually having fun, but I know that losing track of time happens to me a lot worse than other people. So I really have to always restrict my hobbies, especially on really busy work days. It's really pronounced when I'm playing chess, for example. I can play for several hours on end without even wanting to stop. Or when I'm watching something on Netflix or scrolling on social media, I have to really control myself, or else I can just spend several hours just playing and having fun. My biggest problem with hyperfocusing is that I can get really exhausted afterwards. Prolonged focus over a long time on a single task can be exhausting for anyone, but with hyperfocusing during ADHD it's so much more intense. We can ignore everything and everybody around us and give everything to that single task. Hyperfocusing with ADHD is really unpredictable. It can happen any time of day, but when it happens late in the evening it's especially draining because it's really hard to switch off afterwards. This really does affect my sleep hygiene and causes me to feel a lot more anxiety on days when I haven't slept very much. So now with medical school finished, I've been really experimenting with a solid nighttime routine to help me work optimally with the hyperfocus and to not exhaust myself too much at the end of each day. If you think it will be helpful for me to talk about my nighttime routine with ADHD, then drop a comment in the comment section below. Naturally, it's really difficult to start tasks with ADHD, and this is very well documented and understood. But one of the really important difficulties that I have with ADHD is that I can't stop doing a task once I've started and I've hit flow. This makes it particularly difficult for me to follow a strict timetable because of the distorted time perception alongside the difficulties of starting a new task. So I've learned that it's very important for me to go easy on myself and let my ADHD and hyperfocus work for me rather than to try to restrict it and let it work against me. Through my experiences of being at medical school over the past few years, I found some important workarounds to help me with stopping and switching off from a task, which I'll be sharing in future videos. But just to help you guys with switching off after hyperfocusing, one of the things that's been really groundbreaking for me has been creating more defined boundaries between tasks to help me juggle multiple tasks a day and to switch off between tasks. I've also developed my own vocal affirmation for when I've finished a task to help me properly switch off, and I'll be talking about this a lot more in future videos. With hyperfocusing, just because I'm able to work on a particular task for several hours on end doesn't necessarily say anything in terms of productivity. Sure, my cognitive performance skyrockets, but it doesn't mean I'm always working on the right task. Often I just find myself going down a rabbit hole for several hours on end. Hyperfocusing to solve a problem or complete a task that isn't really possible to complete in a single sitting. And this is a really important take-home message for those of you that are struggling with hyperfocusing with ADHD, to actively ask yourself, am I working on the best possible task right now in this very moment? Is it the task that will make my life easier and the life of those of everyone around me? Personally, when I asked myself this, and I've gotten really into the habit of asking myself this with ADHD over the past few years, I find that most of the things that I'm working on aren't the most important priority. So it really has helped me see the bigger picture and not to miss the forest for the trees. Another massive problem with my hyperfocusing, particularly in the context of loss of time perception, is that I'm always late. The problem with continuing to work on a single task for several hours on end is that I'm only really able to stop when I get out of hyperfocus or when I've completed that task. This gets so bad that I so often make myself late for personal commitments, meeting friends or attending class, appointments or clinics late because I couldn't stop a task or lost track of time because of my distorted time perception. Hyperfocusing really is unpredictable. It can happen when I'm doing the most routine things, brushing my teeth, showering, or even cleaning my dishes. I'll just get really stuck into these tasks and leave myself too little time to make commitments. Hyperfocusing also doesn't just happen during work. It happens for most people during routine or fun and leisurely activities. So it's really very easy for me to get consumed during these non-work related activities and to lose my perception of time. What this means is that I really have to actively restrict myself, because I know just how likely I am to go to hyperfocus when I'm playing a game or watching a series or on social media. So throughout my 6 years of medical school, I've only allowed myself to watch 1 or 2 series because I know just how cumbersome they can be for me. And this can be both a positive and a negative. It's a negative in that sometimes I feel I'm being a bit too strict on myself and not letting myself enjoy things that are important to help me unwind. But then I've also found that it's been really a game changer for my ADHD. By restricting the things that are not in themselves productive, it's really helped me become more efficient in other parts of my life and to really work towards managing my ADHD better in all aspects of my life. So yeah, there's some of the difficulties that I have with my ADHD and hyperfocusing. I'm really interested to hear whether any of this resonates with you and what your experiences of hyperfocusing with ADHD have been like. And so please let me know your own thoughts and experiences. What have been some of the things that have been difficult for you and how have you overcome them? Please comment in the comment section below and I'll catch you guys next time.